Welcome, everybody, to the 20th episode of Patio Ponderings. And this one's kind of an interesting one because I'm meeting with Tara Deines, formerly Oliver, and we're about 6 miles apart. But we're online, and it actually worked out good because today's a snow day because of the ice, and we were just talking before we chatted about how our children are handling e-learning differently between a freshman in high school and a kindergartner. And I think most of the people on here going to e-learning for a kindergartner? Yeah, I agree. Just let them play with blocks and forget about it. So welcome, Tara. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Yes, looking forward to it. I appreciate you having me.
As I started looking at our backgrounds, we ran parallel paths, even though we're 16, 17 years apart in age. Now, that isn't meant for everybody to calculate how old Tara is. But we grew up, I Googled it, we're 5.25 miles apart, our houses. Okay. Yep. We went to adjacent high schools. We both went to Purdue. We both have degrees from Kansas State University, and we're both fortunate to come back to the Leo Grable area and have our careers. So, Tara, can you kind of give us just a quick overview of your life and what brought you back to Leo?
Yeah, absolutely. So, born and raised in Leo, families all from this greater area outside of Fort Wayne, essentially. Grew up showing livestock and in the 4-H world primarily. My family didn't farm, extended family all farmed, and a lot of affiliation with the ag community. Once I graduated from Leo High School, I went on to Purdue. And actually, when I went to Purdue, I ended up just going through the business school. I wasn't entirely sure if or what I wanted to do and if I wanted to be in agriculture specifically, and felt like business would give me more of a just general degree that I could apply to a lot of different things. And while I was at Purdue, I did an internship with Archer Daniels Midland with ADM. And that was a lot of my first experience into the professional agriculture world. And so from there, that kind of really just took my journey more down the ag sector, especially in the grains and commodity space. And once I graduated from Purdue, then had a full-time job as well. And ultimately, as you mentioned, went to Kansas State for my master's in ag business. And then again, worked for a couple different grain companies, moved around Indiana a little bit, and then ultimately landed back in Leo, which is where I grew up and where I'm from and have a few children. And so it was nice to come back to family in the area, especially with kids.
And I'm sure your parents don't mind having grandkids close.
Yeah, definitely. That is I think everyone's happy about that. We actually just relocated back to the area about a year and a half ago. So okay. We decided our oldest is in kindergarten this year, and we just decided before we started school somewhere that we wanted to be where we were going to be for the long haul. So we were living in southern Indiana down near Louisville, Kentucky prior. So we went from one end of the state to the other and came back home.
Very good. As you were talking about your time at Leo and growing up, it hit me that you've got 2 sisters and a brother, right?
Correct. Yep.
And all of you are in ag in some way.
That's correct.
That is so interesting.
Everybody went to Purdue, and everybody is involved in different aspects of agriculture. My sister is a landscape designer, so she's kind of in that side of ag. My brother and I actually worked for the same company for a while, so he works for a grain company as well. We worked for the same company for 8 years. Before I ultimately started my own business. So he still works in the grain sector. And then, our youngest sister actually works for a new kind of tech startup in the drone application business right now.
Oh, so she made the change from Farm Bureau.
Correct. She was at Farm Bureau for a while. Now she works for Sultan Tech, which is the new, or I'm not sure I'm even pronouncing that right. But yeah, doing, it's actually not even drones. I guess it's more robots and applications.
Okay. That's neat.
So yeah, we all ended up in different sectors of ag, but all related to agriculture.
So I went to Northrop, which is a city school.
Yep.
I had talked about going to Woodland to get to be exposed to ag, but we chose to stay. Leo used to have a strong FFA program, but that was before I was born, so many years ago. What about your upbringing set it up that all 4 of you chose to go in some sort of ag?
Yeah, I mean, from a high school standpoint, we went to Leo, and obviously there was no FFA program or no real ag programs at all that were offered through the school. So all of our exposure to ag was primarily through 4-H programs and, just association and affiliation with family and family friends that had deeper roots in agriculture. But 4-H I would say ultimately be the largest driver that we all participated in, experienced, and got involved with showing livestock.
And your grandfather and uncle farmed in DeKalb County, right?
That's correct. Yeah. My grandpa and all of his siblings actually pretty much all farmed separately. And then my uncle and my cousins farmed with my grandpa. So again, we grew up around a lot of family, extended family, all farming. And but that wasn't my day to day, right? My day to day was more of just, the 4-H and livestock side of things.
And you also did sports too, didn't you?
Yes, for sure. Lots of sports, 3 sports primarily for a majority of high school. And then that was always a tough balance with 4-H as well.
Oh, yeah. And did your dad coach you?
My dad did coach. He still coaches, but he did coach pretty much all of us throughout our careers playing and through high school. He still coaches currently, assists at the varsity level, and he's also helping coach my kindergartner. So,
oh, cool.
Getting back
it was neat.
It.
I went to one of his games up at East Side, and I forgot that he was helping Sam, and to see him walk across going, oh, I know 2 coaches.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's been great to have him as a coach, obviously, all through my childhood and then even into high school. And then now it's fun to see him help coach my kindergartner.
Well, another reason it's good you're close to Grandpa.
Absolutely.
So you chose to go into business school. That was housed in Cranert, right?
That was in Cranert. Yep, correct.
Yeah.
I chose the business school because I wasn't entirely certain that being in ag would just, I guess I was afraid a little bit that being in ag would maybe kind of narrow my scope of opportunities. And I felt like if I went through the business school, I could still go into ag. But I was a little more concerned that if I went into ag business, I would be kind of more pigeonholed just into agriculture. And at that point, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do with my life anyways, so I was just trying to give myself more options. So went into the business school, and, hindsight, obviously, I think being in the ag school would have been better for me and would have been great. But again, that was kind of the path that I had, was being in the business school, and a lot of my friends were more ag related or in the ag school specifically. But where a lot of the opportunities came was, in some of the extracurriculars, being involved in some different things, friendships, network, and then ultimately through internships and opportunities to connect more in the ag industry that way.
So what was it about that internship with ADM that hooked you on wanting to be in grain merchandising origination?
Yeah, so actually I had a friend who was interning with ADM on the operations side of things, and he said, hey, you should come meet them at the career fair. Maybe you could get an internship as well. And so I went, and at the time was not really familiar with ADM as a company, and talked with them at the career fair. A few friends had interned with them, and I had a friend who was currently interning with them, and they said, we think you could be a great fit to be a commodity merchandiser. Would you have any interest in that? And I said, well, what's that? And so they explained to me what a commodity merchandiser was and what the role would entail. And I said, sure, that sounds like that could be fun. And they said, would you be willing to relocate, for the summer? And I said, absolutely. And they said, how would you feel if you were the only female in the office? And I said, welcome to agriculture. So that was really my first kind of I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, but took the summer to learn. And it was just a fun, fast-paced environment with a lot of good people. And I think I had a great experience kind of learning from a good set of people in my first summer. But I just really enjoyed, I guess, kind of the variation day to day and the opportunity to engage with growers specifically, and really enjoyed it. And then it just kind of continued on from there.
This isn't the first time that this has happened, but I use ChatGPT and I make a script.
Yeah.
And then it usually gets put in the trash really quickly. And I've got some notes here that things I wanted to talk about, that impressions of you beforehand and directions I wanted to go, but you just brought up something that I had not thought about. And that is, you are kind of the hinge generation on females in ag. And I would say that I'm the hinge generation in races in ag. I'm solid Gen X. I was on a generation where you saw black people on Sesame Street, and it wasn't that big a deal. So to me, I'm kind of that one. And for you, it appears to me that you're the one where you were not pioneering women in ag, but you were the ones that it was a little more accepted. And I don't mean that we didn't accept women before. And then I think about my daughter who graduated from K-State in 21. Okay. She graduated 21. So you're halfway between both of us. And for her, it's no big deal. And if you actually look at her cohort, it was mostly female in the School of Ag at Kansas State. Can you kind of dive into how you reacted to being asked about being the only woman in the office there at that ADM office? So 12 years, 13 years past that experience, do you think that's a question or a comment that needs to be asked if you were in that same situation in 2025?
I think it's more commonplace today. I think there's very few offices today that probably don't have some diversity. I think we've come a long way in that. So for many of their locations, it certainly could still be the case, and it is in some, but I think it's probably not as stark of a difference as it was. When I first started in the industry, we, like you mentioned, even with your daughter, there's more females that have continued to come into this space and taken positions and opportunities. So I think it's become maybe less of a need to have the question because it's not as drastic of a difference as what it was previously. But I do think it's important to still, make recognition of the opportunities to help, younger individuals, male or female, stay connected and learn to engage and grow in their career with like-minded people.
Would it be more of an important question to not ask about the office environment, but in your customer environment? Because I think there's a massive difference between the demographic that you deal with on commodity protection and risk protection than what you work with in your cohorts on that same side.
Sure. Yeah, it's definitely, I would say there's always been some interesting things in the agriculture world that I was probably more naive to. If they take customers, for example, working in the grain industry, almost all of the farmers are males. There's very few female farmers. And I remember when I was straight out of college working at my first job, and one of my coworkers said, "Do you ever have any of the wives who get frustrated when you come visit?" And I said, "No, why?" And he said, "Well, just a young female riding in a combine with, their husband." And to me, that never even crossed my mind that there would be any concerns about, a grain buyer showing up to ride in a combine. That's a very normal thing. But it did kind of, I guess, create more emphasis on the gender side. Or I also had a boss who at one point I went to do a farm visit and they had asked if I would come to their house to just have dinner, meet for dinner at their house. And my boss said, "Are you going by yourself?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I'm going by myself." And he said, "Well, you understand, you're 21 years old going to meet someone that you've never met before while it's dark out at their house." And I was like, "Well, why is that concerning? These are customers of ours." But it was kind of back to this gender thing of, maybe people will feel differently because you're female, and maybe those situations will or won't be comfortable or uncomfortable. And so there was some of that as a younger and career person, you kind of learn and maybe are pretty naive to when you first start out in the industry.
It sounds like you had a pretty good foundation on yourself as a person and your skills. And did you ever get the feeling that you had to prove yourself more because you were a female?
Yes, for sure.
Okay.
There was quite a few instances where, at a grain company, you have a lot of growers who are calling in and they would say, "Can I talk to one of the guys?" And I'd say, "I can help you." Or they would say, they would assume that I was a secretary or in accounting, not someone who was, buying the grain or transacting some of that. So there certainly was a lot of that. And that just goes back to the ag industry is slow to adapt. You have a lot of older generation that just was kind of how it was. There was always a female who maybe ran the front office or did things like that. So it definitely was, again, something that I was probably a little more naive to because generationally that wasn't something that I had really had to deal with until I started working in the professional world.
Okay. As you talk about asking for one of the guys, my interaction has changed because I think about calling up to the AGCO dealer in Auburn, and whoever answers the phone just answers the phone, unlike some places where a receptionist does. And I used to say, can I speak to somebody in parts? And they say, well, I can help you. And now it's like, I start in like, hey, I've got an AGCO part number for a gleaner combine. I need to do this.
Right.
And put the onus on them to say, hey, I can't help you, as opposed to me filtering and assuming they can't help me.
Sure. And I think that's where a lot of that, again, generationally, there usually was someone who would answer the phone. And a lot of times it was a male, right? I mean, that was just the world that a lot of agriculture had been in for a while. So when a younger female answered the phone, to them, it was probably just, you're an entry-level person. Yeah, kind of in a more receptionist type role.
Yeah.
So that, there definitely was some of that again, I was probably more naive too. And I think that, I appreciated the challenge and was happy to take it head on.
So was the challenge of proving yourself as a female more difficult than the challenge of understanding the lingo and how we actually bought grain and how you can help people with HTAs or basis contracts or the inner workings of grain merchandising?
I would say, that certainly is much more challenging. I think the difference was, for me, I always felt like I had to prove myself a little bit more, or maybe just, take a little more time than someone who had inherently maybe been, a similar age, but was a male in that job. It seemed like there was maybe just a little bit more natural, like trust and respect for their knowledge and skill set. And so it just kind of took a little bit longer. But I'll also say it had its perks too. I mean, most of the growers that I interacted with were not as willing to come down as hard on me, or maybe if there was an uncomfortable situation, I think they felt a little more respectful. And so they were probably more polite in their dealings with a female versus a male. So you know what? It had its benefits as well.
Well, as we're talking about your education of becoming a merchandiser, you're having to educate your customers about you. Hey, I can do it. But you're also having to educate your customers on different programs that at that time CGB had or Anderson's.
Yep.
As I've become more ingrained in our own grain merchandising, I would assume that you still have a huge job to do in educating growers on how to sell grain. Is that right?
That's correct. I mean, there's obviously a lot of ways to sell grain, and so there's a lot of education around that. There's obviously a lot of things that are influencing the market, and it's all continually changing, right? I think that's the blessing and curse of this job, is it's really fun because there's so many things that are changing every day, and you're figuring out how to adjust your positions or adjust your recommendations and educate around that. But that's obviously a curse too, because nothing ever stays the same. So, but it is a continual education. And that's what, with, the growers that I've dealt with over the years, or even the growers that I work with now, and that's usually what I tell them is one of the biggest things is education. I want them to be educated on what's happening in the markets and why things are happening and what tools and opportunities are available, because that is really how we all continue to grow and be better, is by knowing more and making more educated decisions moving forward.
Okay. So for the audience, Tara and I are just going to talk about our jobs. My job as a farmer and her job as a merchandiser. We are not going to make any recommendations. If you hear anything about puts or calls or recommendations, it's just conversation. It is not a recommendation to take a position with the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. There. A lawyer would be happy with that, I hope.
Yes, good disclaimer.
So you went from Waterloo as your first job, right? Or is that your second job?
I actually was with the Andersons. So when I was with ADM as an intern in college. So I interned in Illinois. And then when I finished, I worked for them during my senior year of college part-time, locally in Frankfort, Indiana, and then started my career with the Andersons in Logansport, Indiana. So I was actually with the Andersons and Climbers at their ethanol plant, was there for 5 years. That's really where I learned a lot about originations and dealing with customers, all about the ethanol industry as well. And then we relocated to Southern Indiana, and I took a job with Consolidated Grain and Barge and learned the river system and the network there, and was there for 8 years before ultimately starting my own business with a few partners where we do risk management and consulting for growers.
So working at the mill at Climbers and then down at Sellersburg, were you working more with country elevators or with farmers?
farmers. My job in the Andersons was to handle all of the originations for the ethanol plant. And so keep track on, obviously what we were buying, what we needed to buy, and then basically build and grow and find new relationships. So was working with a lot of clients that were obviously geographically located well, and trying to grow the relationship so we could buy more grain. Ideally, the company wants to buy the grain cheaper. And then also doing a lot of prospecting and finding new customers that maybe hadn't been delivering grain to us where there was opportunities. And then when I went to Consolidated Grain and Barge, I actually was tasked with helping a majority of the merchandisers there learn how to focus on originations and service clients, and then had clients across their whole region. So essentially covering multiple states, multiple markets.
So what was it that made you want to go in partnership or start your own business?
The corporate world obviously has, again, it's good and it's bad. And I think the biggest thing that I have seen here recently was that every company wants to do more with less. And I wanted to have more of an impact for the farmers that I was working with. Well, at the grain company, it was, hey, you're working with 120 farmers. Can you take 20 more? Can you take 20 more? And at some point, it used to become a joke with a lot of my farmers about getting a hold of me or me not answering my phone. And it was just, you're trying to do so much. And I was trying to have an impact, with a lot of the growers, and obviously still fulfill all the duties that the company was wanting me to do. And as one person would leave, they wouldn't backfill the job, and you would just kind of absorb the clients. And it kind of, to me, I guess, seemed like as time went on, everyone's trying to do more with less. And that also meant pulling back from providing service to growers. So it became more of, we'll answer the phone, we'll give you a price, we'll give you some generic information, but we're not going to proactively engage and reach out and help you like we had been, because you just couldn't. There wasn't enough people and enough time. And that's just not long-term what I really had wanted to do. I wanted to have a deeper, larger impact and really be able to help growers specifically. And so it was just the right time to step out of the corporate world. And a few people that I had relationships with in my career and had worked alongside just kind of all worked where we were able to come together and start our group and start doing consulting for farmers directly.
And your lack of relationship, because of having more customers, is probably the reason that you lost some business.
And, I would hope that I didn't lose a lot of business. I mean, that was obviously my goal. But it definitely was tough because I felt like I was not able to probably service people to the level that I wanted to. I was doing the things that needed done, but was I being as proactive? There used to be times where you could reach out and say, hey, we've got this opportunity and let's talk through this and let me help you learn about this. But when you had multiple people trying to get a hold of you to do X, Y, or Z, you couldn't spend an hour educating somebody on what they really needed to be educated on and giving them the full time that they deserved. And that's just what kind of got frustrating for me. I think with some of the technology that's coming down the line, I mean, there's been a lot of chatter about people being able to just click a button and sell their grain online. And so it did seem like there was maybe less of a need for kind of the grain merchandiser role at a grain company as time goes on, and more of a role for the consultant, because you obviously have farmers who are wearing so many hats and they need to outsource some of what they're doing, right? They need somebody to do their spraying. Maybe they need a crop consultant. And really kind of the marketing side is no different. That's probably one of the things that most growers don't enjoy doing. And so outsourcing that makes more sense for them as their operation continues to get larger.
I read on a cesspool of grain marketing discussions that may be on the book face this morning.
Some entertainment there.
Yeah, entertainment. That's right. That most of the grain, or 2/3 of the grain, is sold at the lows of that marketing year prices. In your experience, both at a merchandiser and working with your customers, is that a fair assessment?
I would say 2/3 seems high to me.
Okay.
But you've got to remember that obviously for, depending on the geography, a lot of producers do tend to move their grain at harvest, do not forward sell it. And typically that's the cheapest time of year to be selling grain. So if a majority of the grain is handled at harvest, then obviously, a majority is probably going to be priced in the lower end of the price range. So I think if you had told me it was, half, I probably wouldn't be I probably would have tended to agree with 2/3 seems a little bit high to me, especially with the amount of on-farm storage that's went up in recent years.
But that had to be frustrating for you, regardless of whether you were in Climbers or down in Southern Indiana, looking at a customer that you could have helped, but you didn't have time to help, and you see them dumping maybe DP or just taking right off the combine. Is that part of the reason that you wanted to look for something on your own?
Yeah, I think it's definitely frustrating because you obviously feel like you can do some, but you can't do everything, right? And in that world too, it's not, the grain company's job isn't to help you sell it at the highest price, right? They want to try to help you. But there's kind of the push versus pull, right? A grain company obviously wants to buy grain as cheap as they can, but they have no futures risk involved or no futures taken into account. So that was kind of also a very push versus pull thing. People would say, oh, you guys filled up on a bunch of $3 corn and now it's $5. I bet you're loving that. Well, at a grain company, they're not taking futures into account. So it's all about the basis trading. Mm-hmm. And so, but that is also still tough. People want to sell the best basis. You're wanting to buy it at the cheapest. And so there is kind of that push versus pull there. But yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that it was frustrating that you didn't have enough time to dedicate to really helping people to the full extent that you wanted.
Did your competitive nature from showing livestock and in sports, did that play into how you were trying to help service customers and maybe how it helped you move out on your own?
I think the competitive nature in me for sure was very helpful in the merchandising space. One, because I always wanted more customers. We wanted all the grain. So I wanted to find people that weren't doing business with me or that were only selling a small amount and figure out how I could buy more. So those were the fun challenges, and the competitive nature really kind of came out. Obviously it was at that point too, at a grain elevator, you don't get the luxury of choosing who you deal with, right? You deal with who you deal with, which meant that you had all sorts of personality types that you got to deal with. And that could be a little bit challenging because not everybody always gels. There are certain personality types that tend to, click a little bit better. And so that also was a little bit challenging. And so being able to be on my own and operate my own business allows me to work with the growers who want the service, who want the knowledge, who want the opportunities. And, we can really work as an effective partnership and team to be productive for them.
And as we get more pressure to be profitable, we all look for partners, whether it's your agronomist, your banker. We tend to neglect or forget about grain marketing. And the partner is just me calling Hugo at ADM in New Haven saying, hey, what's your price?
And you know what? That worked for so many years. So that's obviously a fair, the grain companies did have a lot of emphasis and they did have a lot of people and they were providing the service. And there are still companies that are doing a fantastic job at it. But there are a lot of companies that have continued to minimize their staff, focus on merchandising efforts. You may have used to have 6 merchandisers and now they have 2. Or, a lot of these, if you think about especially out west in some of those areas where there's a lot of smaller like co-ops or elevators, there used to be a merchandiser at every single one of them. Now you may have one hub that has 2 or 3 merchandisers who buy for 15 facilities. So it definitely has changed quite a bit in that aspect. And I think there's some areas and some growers that are really fortunate to still have a great merchandiser and great relationships. I think the challenge is there also is a lot of turnover in that industry. So every time you would get a relationship established and, you had them familiar with kind of how you operated and what you like to do and who your landlords were, they would leave because that was also how a majority of the grain companies were promoting people and educating people was just by turning and burning through a lot of different places. And so that was another challenging thing for me in the grain industry world is if I wanted to stay in a job and work with growers, there was no additional earning potential, unfortunately, because they are wanting to promote managers and want you to manage people. And so if I wanted to have a career in originations for the long haul, my earning potential at a grain company was probably pretty limited.
And that's a topic for a whole podcast series.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's where, again, it was the right fit for me because I really had decided that my passion was in helping growers directly. And so I wanted to be able to stay in that type of capacity. I didn't really want to manage people and have employees. that really wasn't what I was most passionate about. I think I could have done it. I just think, again, that's not where my passion was. And I felt like I could ultimately be more effective servicing growers. And if a grain company was not going to see the opportunity to do that and reward that, then it was probably, the right time to move in a different direction. And again, I think that's, for a grain company, I certainly understand their goals and their objectives as well. And it's okay to just, realize that our paths didn't align.
Well, you embody what I've tried to highlight over the past several months in some of my writings is the Peter principle. And you could have easily been one or two levels above an originator and done a great job, but I could tell that wasn't where you wanted to be. So hats off to you to understand where you really wanted to be, where you want to be passionate, and how you could help customers. So can you give me a quick overview of how you help your customers or how you gain customers with what you're doing now?
Yeah, so our business now is doing risk management and consulting for growers directly. So they pay a per acre fee, and we help handle their risk management, which primarily focuses on marketing. So obviously a producer is the one who physically produces the crop, and they have a lot of decisions to make when it comes to selling that. So we're helping them execute and make the decisions around the sales. So we're putting together a marketing plan and a marketing strategy. And then we are helping them execute that by making a lot of the trades for them specifically. But it's so much deeper than that too. I mean, that's kind of the high level, I guess, wording or way to say it. But, every farm is so complex and all of it affects marketing. What their input costs are and their cost of production affects how we make marketing decisions. The type of cash rents or lease structures that they're on makes implications on how we handle their marketing. Now we're in the world of carbon and sustainability. What programs you're in can affect how you're marketing. So I say all of that as far as managing risk management, and everyone says, okay, so if a producer, has 100,000 bushels, you're helping them figure out when to sell and helping make the sales. Yes, that's true, but we're also figuring out, there's storage and there's logistics and there's trucking spreads and there's so many components that all wrap into selling your grain. And it's a lot to process. So we're trying to take as much of that information, take a lot of the pressure off of the grower to bear the burden themselves and really be involved at that level. And then all of our clients as well are kind of a network of growers. So we work with growers in 5 states. So they trying to also just kind of use our grower network to share and leverage information for all of them.
So with all the complexity you talked about, all your customers are 5, 10, 15,000 acre farmers, right?
Our range spans from 1,000 acres to 25,000 acres.
Okay.
I mean, there's everything in between. I'd say our average grower size is probably somewhere between 5,000 to 8,000. But we've kind of got, a very good mix of different grower sizes.
It sounds like you can have fun with that because you'll have somebody that has a majority that has to be taken to town, and you have others that probably have a majority that's on farm, and the logistics around that and how you help them has to be fun.
It is fun. I mean, again, no two farm is the same. We get asked a lot, what percent sold would you recommend somebody is today? And there is no one size fits all when it comes to marketing. And so I think that's the difference in kind of how we look at things. Every farm is so unique. Yeah, if someone doesn't have storage or can store everything, I probably have a different opinion on how aggressive we should or shouldn't be. And so it is fun. I think it's a fun puzzle to always figure out all of the components and how to really help people maximize their potential and profitability through a lot of those things. And again, just educating them on maybe things that they haven't thought about and opportunities that we can take advantage of.
No, because it appears that the people that want to use your services want to do it, and they understand that your 10, 15, 80, whatever dollar per acre is an investment. Do you still have some customers that you kind of have to hold by the hand and lead a little bit more than you want to?
And again, there's so many different personality types. So there's some relationships that are a little more hands-off. They just need a little bit of guidance, and they'll be able to kind of take that and run with it. But honestly, a majority of the relationships I want and they want to be pretty hands-on. So we do have a lot of conversations and a lot of we're making decisions together. It's not that I'm making the decision or they're making the decision. We're working on it collectively to make the best decision with all the information that we have. So, again, there's different levels of relationships, I would say, and some people are a little more comfortable or proactive or better on their own. But there's so many components to this that, I'd say a lot of them are, pretty hands-on, and we're kind of walking side by side through all of it together.
And as you're talking, my brain is wandering back to Leo High School, which I would say the most affluent high school in our area. Mm-hmm. There's some pretty nice houses in our district, but we've got a nice little handful of people that are in ag. You got your family, you've got my family, you've got the Bonins. It's interesting that we had that influence, but you know what? The one kind of common thread of all those? It's that little place over on Carroll Road we spent so much time.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's exactly it. I mean, I had a great experience in high school. I don't want to discount anything, but, very little from my high school career influenced my ultimate career in life. Even a majority of my friends from high school, right, were not necessarily ag affiliated or even remotely had anything, in high school. Obviously, it was kind of always the big joke about my family having livestock because that just wasn't something that was very commonplace for our town, our high school, versus, some of the communities that I work in now and seeing, how heavily rooted in agriculture some of these more rural areas are. It's just such a different experience from what I had growing up. And I certainly have, again, loved the town, loved the school. I've loved my whole experience. But I do think that the 4-H side of things and the network and experiences there is really what helped shape a lot of that. The competitiveness from sports is one thing, but obviously even the competitiveness in showing livestock, the diligence and responsibility of completing projects and, things like that were very influential.
Yeah, and I think we're at a crossroads in the 4-H program. We can talk about that, but I think that foundation exposure to ag is huge for the cohort and the people that we spend time with. A funny little story. Shelby was a sophomore, I think, maybe a junior at Leo. And she told me when she got home from school, it said, "Hey, I sat down to lunch and I told everybody that we got a new Ram today." And everybody at the table goes, "You got a new truck?" And she goes, "No, I got a Ram."
Yeah. Again, it was just but I also think that was, I guess, the beauty of also going to a non-rural or non-ag oriented school is the opportunity to educate more people. So. Yeah, you got to take it in stride as well.
Oh, yeah, you do. So I wouldn't trade our kids' upbringing for anything.
Absolutely. I agree.
Origination Academy. What's that?
Yeah, so obviously the primary business that we operate is servicing growers. And so that is where my passion is. That's where my full-time job is. But as I exited the grain industry, I had a lot of friends who said, "Hey, you did a great job training and leading a lot of the merchandisers. Could you help teach our merchandisers?" So I had some other industry contacts that had all reached out saying, "I would love for you to help train our staff on how to build relationships and how to buy grain." So we had a few companies that all reached out. Obviously, I didn't know what I was doing in that space. But again, some other previous coworkers who we had all worked together at Consolidated Grain and Barge came together, put together a curriculum that we use. We've done a few custom training programs for companies, helping train their originators and their merchandisers. And again, I think one of the biggest things that I'm focused on with that is if there's opportunities to share my knowledge and train some people, I'm certainly all for that. And if there's ways to make other individuals in the ag industry or within grain companies better, I am certainly all for that, because that will help hopefully their connection with growers. And if we can also continue to reiterate why relationships and bringing value are so important, then hopefully that will slow down this shift in the industry from kind of going away from relationships.
So your experience working with training out now that you're on the outside looking in, and the time that you mentored, and I'm thinking what you've done with Isabel up at Waterloo, it seems like there's two things that you need to train on. One is the mechanics of origination, and as we talked about, different contracts and delivery periods. But the other one, it seems, is relationships and selling skills. Which one of those is the most difficult, or which one of those is the one that you see more need for?
For sure, the second. I mean, I think everybody can teach you the mechanics, right? Here's what futures are, here's what basis is, here's how the market trades, here's how it works. I mean, you can teach anybody that. What you can't teach somebody is how to be passionate. You can't teach somebody how to care. And we don't spend time teaching people how to have a relationship and what's important in that relationship. You know, even for myself, learning straight out of college, you know, it was, yep, here's futures basis, contract types, the mechanics of what you need to know, how to read a bid sheet, go by grain. Nobody really told me, like, here's what you say when you call someone you've never met. Here's what you do when you show up at a farm for the first time ever. And thankfully, I had a lot of good peers that kind of helped guide me through that. But the thought with Origination Academy is that's where the opportunity is to help provide more structure and training, because most of the ag industry is you're only as good as the people that you sit next to. You get plopped down at an office and whoever is next to you is who teaches you, and they may have a really proactive mindset or they may not at all. And so how do we kind of minimize some of that and create more consistency around the opportunity? So Origination Academy is all focused on how do you prospect and find customers, and what do you do and what do you say, and how do you build relationships, and what do people care about, and how do you bring value to a conversation, and what does that look like, and seasonally how does that change, and a lot of those different components.
That's probably more frustrating because there's no right or wrong. It's talking about relationships and helping people discover who they are and how they can help, right? Right.
And it's definitely, I think, there's a ton of opportunity there. The frustrating part is, one, most companies aren't willing to focus the time on it because it's expensive to train people, and you're also not sure those people are going to stick around. So they do the bare bones minimum training until they're like 5 to 10 years into their career, and they're like, okay, well now this person's here and we can't break the bad habits. And two is you cannot control what people do. And so it's all about management. You know, we did a custom training program for 50 merchandisers. And I think they all got a lot out of the merchandising, but it was really disheartening to see the lack of engagement from management, because at the end of the day, we can give them tools and resources and suggestions and guidance on how to go forward, but their managers have to be the one who drive that to say, you know, this is the priority and this is what you need to do. And so that was probably most disheartening through kind of this Origination Academy experiences. The training is there, and there are young people, and there are even people who are 20 years into their career that have been super eager to do it and learn, and they have done well. But some of that too is in the younger generation. Without a strong manager kind of guiding you, you can get a little lost, and that's a little bit challenging also.
Well, you almost have to do a mentor version of Origination Academy.
Yeah, and we've had you know, I think, yeah, we've had some learning with that. Obviously, we want to put the responsibility back on the managers, you know, the companies. But it does seem like, again, everyone's trying to do more with less. So managers are spread thin, you know, they're managing more people. Maybe originations isn't their expertise. They're better at managing a facility, and they're just kind of have a few originators by, you know, default. So definitely has been interesting to kind of see how a lot of that has evolved as well.
You've also got a remoteness, don't you? In some of these locations, you might have an originator, but their boss is 2 states away.
Absolutely. I mean, there's significantly more consolidation in the office structure. You know, people are trying to attain talent and retain talent, and it's hard to say, hey, do you want to move to the middle of nowhere, Nebraska, Iowa, Indiana, you know, name the state. And so as a younger person coming out of college into the industry, you know, so people have tried to go more to these cities or hubs or downtown offices to try to create, I guess, maybe more of the desire for younger and career students to come out and want to live and work where they're offering the opportunity.
And then you also have the interest change in ages. And I think about Waterloo. Now, Gary Lyons is a cousin of mine, so I've known him since I was born. When we were at Fort Wayne Farm Show, we were talking about Medicare. So that tells you where he is.
I just see recently he mentioned that he's going to retire soon, so he's thinking about it.
Supposedly.
Like. Yeah.
Yes. And then you got Isabel, who's fresh in her career, and she's struggling to find where she needs to be and what she needs to do and help. And you've got Gary, who people have known him for 50 years. They knew his cousin or his uncle that ran the co-op beforehand. So you've got that management challenge of, okay, Gary, you're going to leave. Isabel, you're starting your career. We've got to work together. And sometimes that doesn't work, does it?
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge too, is you have managers who want to say, okay, I'm going to manage all the merchandisers this way, right? And there's going to be goals and there's going to be this. And it is so different, right? People are at different places in their career. People have had different experiences. And so really needing to get to a more individualized level is important, but people don't have the time. And so they tend to just say, here's the broad how we're going to manage. And in your instance there, with two very distinctly different merchandisers, by personality and by age, I mean, you can't manage them exactly the same. And so that's what also can cause some, I think, challenges with the grain companies as far as how they're continuing to try to handle the management side.
Having never been in management, but spending quite a few moments thinking about management the last few months, I think that is a golden opportunity up at Waterloo where you could just sit them down and lead and empower one and empower both. I think that would be a fun place to be as a manager. Like, hey, this is cool.
Yeah, but you've also got to remember that, management in that instance is not localized, and it is, 3 to 4 hours away. And so that also makes it hard because, again, you're kind of managing through these consolidated offices and hubs. And so they don't see or feel or hear the day to day to be able to have as much influence and guidance.
So your experience being on site in Climbers, being on site but remote in Sellersburg, gave you an interesting mix of experiences close and far away. Does that really help you as you went out on your own and are truly a consultant?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely my experience when I was in Climbers, I was at the office every day working around people. And I think for the point of my career that I was being new, I mean, I needed that. And I think that's very much was important. When I moved to Southern Indiana, I was covering a much broader originations area. So I had to find more of a balance. And I think the one thing that I found, and I think that if I could give any other younger career people the recommendation is, it was important for me to physically be present and immerse myself into the local communities and networks that I was originating grain. I might have lived in Southern Indiana, but I immersed myself into the communities in Kentucky and in Illinois and in Southwest Indiana. And so even though I didn't have to live there, and, do all the things there and work out of the office every day, people could still feel like I was very much a part of their world if I made the effort to do so. And so that gave me the luxury of having more flexibility and having the opportunity to work remote, because I put in the time and I put in the effort to do that. And so now I work remote. All of the growers that I work with, obviously I'm not working at anyone's farm every given day. But again, I am very aware and immersed in their local community, their local environment, their networks. And I don't think if you're not willing to do that, it will be very hard to be successful.
Well, it sounds like you're having fun without no longer having the reins of corporate holding you.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yes. Yes. And that was one of the challenges even with Consolidated Grain and Barge. I had, they have a facility, obviously, not far from Leo. And I had wanted to have some flexibility to live closer to family, and that was just not something that they were interested in at the time. And they felt more of a need to keep people in a specific geography. I think obviously, again, they've kind of started to change their mindset on that since those times. And I think all companies go through that period of just learning and growth. But for me, that was obviously a big priority as well.
Well, and I think ag in general is at a crossroads as profit margins are tightened and we're trying to do more with fewer people, as you brought up, with that sometimes we forget the human element. And I did an HTA a couple weeks ago, and we were at 1049, 1059 on beans. And I said, can you do 1060? Make it a round number. Oh, my price is this. I'm like, it was a penny. It was a penny. He's like, here's my price. And I took it. So I didn't want to fall into that. I didn't sell because it wasn't 1050. Sure. A penny means nothing. But a penny means something because now I remember he didn't give me my penny. It didn't matter. It's $5 or it was $50, whatever it was. It was nothing. But those relationships and those ways that we can teach people and management, if we're just judging by the numbers, we lose that. And sometimes those little things are what makes the relationship so much stronger.
And
so
that's
now
it.
I'm thinking he didn't give me a penny, as opposed to, hey, that's a good dude. He gave me a penny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
In the
and
big
that's
scheme,
the toughest,
a penny means nothing.
right. That's the toughest part is I think a grain company wants to continue to focus on buying grain as cheap as possible, all of those things. And it feels like they're walking away from service. But the depth of the relationship is something that I think is maybe downplayed a little bit. There's times where you need to fill a train or you have some off quality grain and you need to call in some favors. And if you have the relationships, there are people who will gladly show up at your doorstep and help you. And if you don't have the relationships, those become significantly more challenging and more expensive to get that done. And I think that's one thing that, maybe is going to kind of catch up with grain companies eventually is that, I was really fortunate to have a lot of good relationships. And if we got in a situation, there were growers that I knew who would help us out and have my back. And, we worked well together. But as you stop doing a lot of those little things for them, they're not going to be as willing to do the little things for you either. And I think that's something that, again, you can buy grain cheaper and you can do less and you can have maybe, less staff, all of those things. But again, over time, those will catch up with you in other ways.
Well, we had another experience this year. We made a mistake with some cover crops. We had rye on our beans, and I was over FM, and one elevator says we can't take it. So the last 75% of my production went to another elevator that was further away because they were like, "Hey, we'll work with you. We know you got a problem." Mm-hmm. Whereas the other one that was closer didn't. So I'm going to remember that. So you get back to it's that relationship.
Yeah, I was going to say, those are the things that you value, right? As a grower, especially having the relationship, someone helping you through some not great situations or some tougher times. And I think that's, again, where with relationships, that's much easier to do. And with just kind of you don't know who you're talking to on the other end of the phone, it won't happen as much.
Well, you've had a really interesting experience in your short career. It's been, 15 years? 12 years?
15, yeah, 15.
15 years, wow.
Graduated college in 2010 from Purdue, and then I did my master's at K-State shortly thereafter. Okay,
and servicing a wide variety of geographies. I mean, if you haven't traveled Indiana north to south, you don't understand what the difference between Waterloo and Leo and the Louisville area. I mean, and
soil types.
And it's funny that we lived in Iowa, and just up the road was a field that was, I think, 960 acres because it went across roads and took out fences. And they don't understand that southern Indiana, you could get 960 acres, but it's going to probably take 90 fields.
Yes. Yeah. The difference in, just soil types, how the ground lays, somewhat of farming practices, all of that. And so it is fun. It's interesting. We're working with growers in Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, and Kentucky primarily, a little bit in Missouri and some down into Louisiana. So we've got a few kind of outliers. But yeah, I mean, all of those locations are so different. And I think the other cool thing too is with our grower base, we have a good network. And so listening to folks from Michigan talk to growers from Kentucky and share and help them understand, how their worlds are so different, but also so similar has been really fun to see as well.
Well, you're not even halfway through your career and you've already had a fun time. That is neat.
Yeah. Hopefully it just keeps getting more fun from here.
Oh yeah. Well, of course it helps. We get back to having grandparents close to your grandkids. That makes your job easier too.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I'm super fortunate. I work with a lot of growers who are friends, they're all like family or friends. And so that makes my job really fun as well. I work with a great set of growers and that makes it really fun. Obviously, surrounded by, family and friends locally, which makes this all really fun as well to be able to have the opportunities to have a career and also have a family.
Well, we've got to the part of every podcast where I ask 5 questions. And if you listen to Micah's, you got to hear his answers. So I think you're the 15th person I get to ask this to. There's some commonalities and there's been some surprises. So I want to throw them out to you.
Sure.
Maybe you've thought about them. I did not share them beforehand for my audience. So here we go. The first question is, what is one lesson from agriculture that you carry with you every day?
I think one of the lessons I've continued to carry is all about the importance of your network. There are people that you will meet. This industry is so small, but so big at the same time. But there are people that you will meet that you don't ever know what capacity they will come back and maybe have an influence in your life or your career. I think I learned that in college. I had a lot of people tell me that, and I didn't really understand it until I was more advanced in my career. But people that I work with as clients were some of my friends in college, people that I, have connections with. They might be a crop consultant that I work with, or, they were people that maybe, I knew from my 4-H days or that I knew from college. And so it's like this ability to continue to grow and build your network and leverage your network, I think is super important in agriculture.
Yes. And we don't emphasize it enough, enough. If you could have a coffee with any historical figure in agriculture, who would it be and why?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I have not really had to think about specifically. I don't know if I could even pinpoint it to just one person, but I think I learned this pretty early on, and it would be interesting to sit down and have a coffee with someone or multiple people. But, Mike Mock from the Andersons was someone who was very influential in kind of helping me learn when I started out at the Andersons. And I think one of the things that I always felt when I was new in career was so many people had lived through so many more things than I had. And people would talk about, I remember the flood of this year or the, whatever of this year. And Mike, I remember during the drought of 2012 said, for all of you who are young in your career, I need you to take a folder and I need you to save all the things that happened related to this year, because this will be one of those benchmark years that people will talk about forever. And so I always wished that I would have had the opportunity to talk to someone who had lived through more of these. I continued to hear all these stories and how the market reacted and influences from these different years that I maybe wasn't alive, or I was alive, but I was too young, or I wasn't involved in agriculture. So I think even just to sit down with someone, whether that would be a farmer or an industry professional who had lived through a lot of those years, I feel like there'd be a lot of good lessons that I could learn from that.
Well, we could come up with some that were in my life before yours. You could talk about the great grain robbery. You could call about payment in kind certificates. And then you could talk about the drought of 88. I mean, those were in my lifetime before you were born.
Right. And that's where, a lot of, there's always so many correlations and historical references in agriculture, right? And so that's where I always wished I had more insight into some of those, because it would be like, we've learned this lesson from the previous drought. I hadn't lived through a drought. So in 2012, that was all a new experience. And I always felt like I wished I could have had somebody that, was around for all of those to give me all of the information and details and answer my questions on those. So.
Yeah, and that was one of your first years. You're going, oh no, if it's always going to be like this is not going to be fun.
Yeah, it was definitely chaotic, but fun at the same time. So,
what is one underappreciated or quirky thing about agriculture or grain marketing that people should know?
I think probably one of the biggest things that's underappreciated in the grain marketing space is just, again, the amount of connections to other components of your business. Everybody wants to think about, I just want to sell the high. And I think there's so many other connections to different parts of your farm or your business that people don't probably give it enough credit. Crop insurance, for example, is a great one. The coverage that you take for crop insurance has a direct correlation to your marketing, because there is a marketing component to your crop insurance, yet people look at those very, very siloed. It's very unusual that you would probably have a conversation about your crop insurance with your grain elevator. But in a way, a lot of those are doing very similar type things. And so I think that's a highly underappreciated component of grain marketing and merchandising, is the connection to other pieces. When I ask growers for their cost of production, I wasn't trying to be nosy. I really just wanted to understand where their break even was and where their profit potential was. And I think a lot of that is pretty underrepresented.
It's your check for the year, so it affects a lot. What is your favorite ag tool, product, or innovation?
I think there's a lot of good technology that we are continuing to try to learn and grow with as this industry continues to learn and grow with that. I think probably one of the best tools, in my world or time in this industry has just been the evolution for grain companies to have everything at your fingertips, to have an app, to be able to see your deliveries, your settlements, to be able to transact grain, to view things. I think that's been a huge tool that every grain company has adopted to, and I hope will continue to just only get better, because I think it is really important for everybody to have that type of information readily available at their fingertips when they need it.
And I think about the 3 apps that I use. Well, one's not an app, one's a website. That kind of sucks. But the ADM one is I can pull everything up and go, oh, yeah, I did deliver that on that day. So that's a great one. And it makes it so much easier.
I mean, I think for me and day to day, the best app that I use is having live quotes, to watch the futures market. I mean, that's highly important for me to be able to see something wherever I'm at, whenever I want to. But I think from like the industry perspective, the grain company piece is probably a big part. And a lot of the technology that growers have with being able to see a lot of that information at the farm level is really helpful.
And with you being a consultant, it puts you in a position where you can help sort through which pieces of technology can help your customer. Yeah,
so that was to say, that's been a huge opportunity for us to really dive into a lot more of the technology and how it influences farms and where we can use it or they can use it to be more effective.
You're not the first one to bring that one up. And the last question is, what is one small change that can make a huge impact in agriculture's future?
I think that being open-minded would be one small change that could make a big impact. I think, again, this industry is always slow to adopt. And so being more open-minded and willing to adopt, I mean, people are still battling trying to get set up for direct deposit because everyone loves a paper check. We're probably the last industry that is, went away from paper checks to direct deposit. So again, being a little more open-minded to react to those sooner, I think would help our industry dramatically. Take ChatGPT as you referenced, or a lot of the AI type stuff. I mean, most people in the ag industry are pretty nervous and scared about how that will influence things. And I think if we had more of an open mind to try and learn, we might be able to adapt to it a little bit quicker.
I get frustrated that I don't get some of my invoices accessed online or email.
Yeah.
And I'm 53. I can't imagine a 21-year-old that is used to information like this having to call, say, hey, can you send me this? And I bet they're just pulling their hair out.
It's quickly changing, but again, it's like most industries were doing this, long before we were. And so I think having more of an open mind and willingness to adapt to that would help us jump over these hurdles faster. Instead, it's a much more drug out process.
Well, here's a funny story about that. I started with ADM Animal Health and Nutrition in Des Moines, Iowa in May of 1998. And I had used my personal email address and unplug my phone and plug it into the modem on my laptop so I could send emails to people. And I didn't get an ADM email address until I'd been there for a year and a half. And we'd been used to using it in college. And so here was a multi-billion-dollar multinational company that hadn't had it yet.
Yeah. We still have a handful of growers who don't have an email address, which blows my mind, but that is still a thing.
So you're happy with people that do have an AOL address because at least they have one.
Yeah, just have anything, really, yeah.
Oh, boy. Well, Tara, this has been fun, and I didn't know where our conversation was going to go, and I would say that this was probably the most intimidating interview to get prepared for because I didn't know where we were going to go. Thank you for taking time, and I'm glad we didn't try and get together with all the ice out, but we'll have to get together for a cup of coffee and just get to understand your business and what you do more, and I'm probably going to go see your dad coach tomorrow night for grins and giggles. So
perfect. We'll go Central Noble.
So there you go. I never thought I'd be cheering for Central Noble.
Yes, well, no, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate the conversation. Certainly fun, and I appreciate you having me.
Great. Well, you're welcome. And to my audience, thank you for enjoying this episode as we got to know Tara a little bit more, have an understanding of her role in agriculture, and more importantly, to have a better understanding of how her agricultural roots formed her into the consultant she is today. As we talked before, we're going to have more conversations like this to deep dive into people's lives and see how agriculture affects them.